Welcome to Dice and Mind, a podcast hosted by Browne and Jason Kaufman to explore the intersection of life, games, science, music, philosophy, and creativity through interviews with leading creatives. All are welcome in this space.
We are breaking the fourth wall yet again. We are recording this just a matter of days before this launches. So this past week has been a snowy one for me here in the frozen tundra. When those days come up, those are perfect reading days,
Yes.
or what I call comfort movie days.
Yes.
And for me, some of my favorite movies to have on, even if I'm doing something on the computer and it's sort of in the background, but I'm watching it, but I'm not fully 100% engaged.
Starship Troopers, Patton, Last of the Mohicans.
Oh, Patton was a great movie, but I can't. When I start watching that, I can't
look away.
I can't look away.
No.
Yeah. Did you know that there was a sequel to that George C. Scott did?
No. Are you serious?
Yeah. It obviously wasn't as good as the first one because no one really knows about it.
But alas, that's not what you're talking about.
No. But nice diversion. And
thank you. It worked.
Because that for me, my attention span. Oh, look, a squirrel. The Potter movies.
Yes.
The what they call the Wizarding World.
Yes.
Wizarding World movies, all 8 of the Harry Potter movies and the 3 Fantastic Beasts movies. I enjoy them, all of them. I'm really kind of sad that they're not going to potentially, or they're probably not going to make any further Fantastic Beasts movies.
I enjoyed those.
And that's it. I kind of hope there's stuff down the road. She's a phenomenal writer. One would argue probably prolific writer.
I think that's fair to say.
So to me, I also like the themes and the underlying, I guess that's just really the right word, the underlying themes in these, and whether you look at it from a secular perspective or you look at it from a faith-based perspective, whether it's one's faith or not, they're a lot deeper than people realize.
Yeah, and as Emily Strand, who's our guest for this episode, as she will say in a few minutes, for her the whole story arc is most salient through a religious lens, which makes sense because a lot of her scholarship is in Catholicism.
Yep.
But so too, I think back to our relatively recent episode, well, actually very recent episode with Ben Rogers, right, with Professor Rogers on the hero's journey. And as you will all not hear in the interview, I intentionally did not bring that up so as not to kind of force the conversation in a direction. But the reality,
talking about like using the Ghostbusters term, cross the streams. You didn't want to
exactly. I did. You don't cross the streams. And even though on this podcast we are obviously fond of crossing the streams, I didn't want to do that because it was going in such an interesting direction. But the reality is that all of Harry Potter can be seen through the hero's journey. Right, like Campbell said.
That's a great point.
And thanks. And the reality is, most religious texts can also be seen through the hero's journey, whether you want to look at them through faith or through, evidence or through whatever third party you want. This is a common trope as a human species. This notion of the hero's journey, this notion of encountering a challenge, having a symbolic death. Like I did when I used a PC for 6 years out of necessity, and then being reborn.
Right?
Nice. The deep cut. No, we're not going to tell anyone what that means. No. Listen to our early episodes, early episodes. Pew pew. But I think it's just an interesting thing. Now, before we hop over to the interview, Brad, we should probably address briefly, why are we talking about Harry Potter? Why on Dice and Mind?
Well, you could argue multiple ways. I mean, there are games out there role-playing games. I can't remember the name of it. It's quite popular. The open world game that's out on PC and Mac.
Oh yeah.
I haven't played it. Just from a cost perspective, I can't justify, just based off a limited time, the cost of that game.
No.
But there's plenty out there, and even if you look out on Genesis, I think there's even something out on 2D20. People have an interest in role playing in this world, and they are using the Foundry or whatever the case is to develop their own homebrews for it.
Right.
Two, I think much like you summed it up better than I will, so I'll just be brief. The idea of a hero's journey fits in with the themes of
all of these games.
Yeah. And so I still think it's worth it. And let's be honest, over the past couple years, maybe prior decade, it was more popular than any other franchise out there.
Oh, and it's still so popular, right? There's talk apparently of producing a spin-off, or maybe it's just I don't know if it's a spin-off or a remake, but
it's a reboot, I think.
A reboot, yeah, of the series. I mean, this stuff will not die. And that's great. You know, I think about it as, imagine all of the people who listen to Dice and Mine because they're into gaming, right? That's one circle on a Venn diagram. Yep. Imagine now all of the people who enjoy Harry Potter, whether it's the Wizarding World, whether it's the books, the films, whatever. That's another circle. There's a lot of overlap between those two circles. I would bet good money that we could go to any gaming con and ask who here loves the Harry Potter franchise, and we're going to get a massive nerd response.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You read all the books, to your girls. I have first editions of the books, which I keep very securely out on the shelf. Even if you just watch the films and are enamored with the Wizarding World, take it for what it's worth. I would recommend reading the books, even if you think they are, if you think they're written for 10 or 12-year-olds,
only the first.
Yeah. Don't get caught in that assumption. Oh. They are well worth a read.
They are book one, clearly, I think, a YA novel.
Yeah.
But when you get into book two, it's rapidly apparent this is by adults for adults. It also plays well for kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's kind of like, you can love the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but you may or may not love The Hobbit because it had a different purpose. And it was earlier in his incarnations. Also, before I transition over, I don't think it can be argued that the Harry Potter series, that whole franchise was not informed by Tolkien. You just can't get away from it, right? I mean, what hasn't been informed by Tolkien in the realm of fantasy and high fantasy, although this is more the low fantasy, like the day-to-day, which makes it so interesting. And I know you like that stuff so much, so I think it's cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, why don't we walk on over to our interview? Emily Strand is an author, podcaster, teacher, speaker, award-winning singer-songwriter, and musician. She holds an MA in theology from the University of Dayton and has taught religion on the college level for nearly 20 years. She has published 2 books on Catholic sacraments and several peer-reviewed chapters and essays on the religious, symbolic, and spiritual themes in popular fiction, such as Harry Potter and Star Wars. With Dr. Kathryn N. McDaniel of Marietta College, she co-hosts Potterversity, a Potter Studies podcast, a show in the MuggleNet family of podcasts.
We were just talking before we hit record, and someone mentioned that we're good at keeping it short. Obviously, that's people who listen to us know that that's not the case, especially when Jason talks.
That's true.
Jason, you and I talked about this in December. For me, I find that I love watching. I could watch them, the Potter movies, including the originals, and then the newer ones, Fantastic Beasts movies. I'm a huge fan. I remember that when we went down to Florida and we went to Potter World. Now I'm embarrassed. I can't remember the name of it. But first thing I wanted to do is the kids wondered what happened to me because I was running like a schoolboy over to get a butterbeer.
I had a butterbeer there too.
Yeah. So
Emily is nodding sagely at this.
Yeah, I'm getting there. The point being is that I find, and this is sacrilege, I know, understand that. I will always put a Harry Potter movie on if Potter and Star Wars are running at the same time. I just prefer watching that.
They're cozy. They're very cozy.
Yes.
And so that being said, we were talking about this. We had our guest on before. And
totally other topics.
Totally other topics. But then we got talking about Harry Potter and we realized that there's some connection there that we'll get into. So we felt it just natural to have Emily Strand back on with us today to talk.
Thank you so much.
Any and all things Potter. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor. It is an honor.
Well, we appreciate you are willing to take us to the Potterversity. See what I did there? This evening, because there's so much to talk about, but there's so much that we want to talk about. However, I'll just start with a question: favorite Harry Potter book or film?
Ooh. Okay. Gosh.
And obviously, a rationale why.
I was ready for a character answer. I was
we can
so ready with that.
Go with that.
Go with character.
Well, okay, because it's Harry, which is it sounds really basic. I mean, it sounds like wow, couldn't you think of a different character than Harry? But apparently it's fairly rare for people to say Harry as their favorite character. But really? I'm all about the point of view guy, and he's kind of a Christ figure. So I'm like, true. I'm naturally drawn to that, as a Catholic. Book, probably different answers for book and film. Probably 1, 4, and 7 for the book, and that's my one answer.
That's interesting.
1, 4, and 7, and then for the film 3, for sure.
Okay, I can see the
Prisoner to Azkaban, Goblet of Fire.
I can see the film.
Yeah.
What 1, 4, and 7 in terms of the of the books, they're very different novels.
They really are, but they are, so 1 and 7 are the bookends, and they have a lot to say to each other in terms of the symbolism and the plot, the different things that are going on in it thematically. And then 4 is the pivot point where the whole series turns from this very kind of childlike, very cozy, story to something much darker and much deeper, and that it's a gateway into the rest of the series. And so there's a lot going on, and that to me makes it fascinating.
I felt like, and original books came out obviously a couple decades ago now. They've won. People didn't realize that they were written at a time, in effect, in the 90s. They were written where it was occurring in the 90s, and you could see how the story matured. And I don't mean it being simplistic. It matured as the characters matured.
Absolutely.
So book 1 was much lighter, book 7, very dark, yet hopeful.
Right. And literally lighter, too.
Yeah.
Literally heavier, to put words in your mouth.
And I have the originals up there, and I told when we were looking at cleaning off the bookshelf, I said we aren't getting rid of those.
Absolutely. No,
classics.
No.
Keep that right next to the C.S. Lewis, and
those are kind of migrated around my house over the years.
Yeah. What attracted you? Because obviously you've got in us talking before, that kind of sci-fi type of interest. What attracted you to the Potterverse, to Harry and the stories?
Yeah,
that's really interesting, because science fiction definitely came later for me, after I had immersed in the Harry Potter books. So yeah, my family, when we grew up, my parents were not speculative fiction people. Like, they were not science fiction people. They were not fantasy people. They thought all that was a little bit hooey. They were very, open-minded about other things, but they were like, no, realistic fiction, classics. We read the classics, all kinds of things. So we didn't read any I didn't have any Ray Bradbury in the house. I didn't have, there was nothing like that. And so when I was in graduate school, after my first semester at University of Dayton, we had read kind of what seemed to us an absurd amount. We were cohorted into this little group, and so all of us were buddies, and we had read a sort of absurd amount of what we thought of as very dense theological texts. And a good friend of mine gave me the 3 books at the end of the semester, and she said, I don't know where she's originally from Ghana. She had just completed her undergrad here in Columbus, Ohio, and she had gone to Dayton and she gave me these 3 books, and she said, she's a big reader. She's just a literary person. She said, here, this will be like brain candy for you. Like, this will be like a little break. I loved these. These were great. I know you'll like them. And I burned through them, and they were exactly like the kind of like levity that my brain needed, and the kind of adventure. And yet it was still meaty, it was still something very substantive. And so I really loved them, but I definitely didn't become, a super fan right away. Fandom itself was new to me. So I wasn't like really a fan of things other than like, I don't know, Joni Mitchell and James Taylor and Jackson Browne and things like that. So I just kind of went about my business, and they all kept coming out. I remember reading 4 and getting really wrapped up in that story, and really freaked out, almost freaked out the way I got freaked out at Stephen King books when I was in the 7th grade,
Yeah.
And so I got really kind of hooked, but the delay in them coming out, and I was busy. I was in grad school. I was pursuing, we were talking earlier, I had a music career that I was pursuing, and writing songs and performing, and so I didn't think too much of them. But then, podcasting became a thing. And so this all kind of dovetails for me. So I started listening to podcasts, and one of the very early, MuggleNet had some podcasts already, and one of them was MuggleNet Academia, and with Keith Hawk and John Granger, and they interviewed different guests. It's a very similar format. Our show, Potterversity, is a descendant of that show. Direct descendant. And so I would be listening to these podcasts, and I would be, shouting my end of the conversation, as I ran around the track.
Right.
Everyone's like, what is her problem? So I loved the discussability of them, everything that makes Oprah Book Club books awesome. It's the discussability, the relatability, the can't put it down, the great as a movie adaptation, all of those things really attracted me. And then by the time the series really matured, as you said earlier, I realized how related it was to what I was studying, which is the Christian mystery. That was at the heart of what I was studying, being somebody studying liturgy and ritual, Christian ritual, that it was just like, oh my gosh, this is like gold that I can use to teach undergrads what these concepts really look like in a person their age. It was kind of like this gift from above, it seemed like. So
you mean Dumbledore?
That was, well, Dumbledore for sure, but then also Harry, and also Ron, and also, there's a lot of manifestations of kind of Christian theology. Lily Potter is such a manifestation of how Christians view Mary and the role she plays as being kind of this gateway through which the magical, the divine came into the world. And I always see Harry Potter, the magic in Harry Potter, as a metaphor, a larger metaphor for the numinous. In the same way Tolkien put fairy as a metaphor for the numinous in his thinking and his stories. And that kind of came out as okay, all of a sudden this is a gateway to the divine, and this character is going in to have a divine adventure. So that's a long answer to a short question.
That's awesome. So and you're not just pontificating, right? You're not just riffing as a podcaster. You are a scholar of these studies. And so I'm curious from that perspective, maybe this is obvious and I just don't see it or don't know. How much of that do you think was intentional in Rowling's writing versus it was simply present because that was probably the background? You know what I mean? Like how much of it became manifest versus maybe there was greater intention, there was a greater purpose behind that.
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that question. Probably she would be the only person to really be able to tell you. And I'm going to be I don't think she'd be honest about it. I think she likes to get very cagey with her answers to things. She likes to keep her cards very close to her chest. So we will never know. We will never know the answer to that question, the honest answer. But I do think that much of it was intentional. There's a lot of the symbolism that she uses, like naming Harry's mother Lily, making her Muggle born, right? I mean, these are just parallels to the Christian story where the origins of Jesus, the human origins of Jesus are, this young woman from this persecuted class of people.
And Dad is James, isn't he?
And Dad is James.
Never saw that before.
And James is not really, so in the Christ analogy, Joseph is not really a blood father to Harry, but he has this lineage that he shares with Harry. And so James fills the same function. Harry comes from this mixed heritage of Muggle-born and purebred, somebody who comes from one of the very good families and has this, even has this magical accoutrement that he passes down to Harry, this cloak of invisibility. That's, one of these magical artifacts from of old. And James also doesn't really play in the story. He doesn't really play a blood father sort of role. That role is given to Dumbledore for Harry. And so, and of course, Dumbledore is very much a God figure, like a Hebrew scriptures God figure, where the goal is, for the main character, they have to die to themselves to really trust in the will of this person, even when that will is shrouded and mysterious. So all of these things, they just kind of lit up my young brain, and yeah. So again, another long answer to a short question.
No, I could see a University of Dayton going through, Summa Theologica or Francois Fenelon, and then switching over to J.K. Rowling. That's like a huge. I mean, that's like a fork in the road. But the way you talk about it, it's gonna. Next time I read it, I'm gonna have to look at it differently.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is because. And this probably has nothing to do with it. It's just something that came up in the back of my head. She grew up in a country that's predominantly Anglican,
right?
And there are obvious parallels between the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, and even some with Anglican with a little bit of the Protestant movement. But this idea, whether she was doing it or not, it's a cultural thing.
And I would politely push back on the idea that it is predominantly Anglican. I mean, I think on the surface, I mean, just having been there and having been me there, I have been treated like a weirdo over there. I mean, somebody asks me what I do and I start talking and they're like, oh God, I've asked one of those evangelical Americans what they, they're going to try to convert me, And so there's, I mean, and maybe I wasn't hanging around the right people. I don't know, but there is a kind of staunch secularism over there. And so to espouse these things publicly, is not done. It's overly emotional and overly, it's not part of the fabric. And that's why I love her kind of division between the Muggles and the magical folks, because magic is everywhere. It's hidden, but it's hidden in plain sight. Right. And, this divide between these people who believe and these people who have an opportunity to believe, but choose to make excuses for it and don't. It's very interesting. It's very interesting way to cast all this. And so back to your question about whether she intended it, some of it, sure. I mean, again, like giving Lily the name Lily, which has long been a flower symbol for Mary. But then this Muggle magic thing, and magic as this metaphor for the divine, I'm not sure that was intentional. I maybe it was just kind of what poured forth, when she, in her compost heap in her head, started writing this story.
I'm waving my wand so that if my magic works, it's going to keep Jason from talking the rest of the time. But I don't think
there is a spell for that.
Yeah. There is
not sure
no
it works
magic
across Zoom. Silencio.
Sorry,
that's what it was.
I have a permanent Patronus against that.
It
doesn't work.
There's a setting in Zoom. It's a permanent Patronus.
Well, we were just talking about settings, because now when you do Zoom, let's see if it works.
Okay.
Yeah, this is fortunately what the listeners can't see, because we're audio only, is fireworks over Brad, which is like the oversell of the century. Okay, so back to intentionality though. So presumably intentionally, so you and your colleague Katie McDaniel, you obviously have the Potterversity podcast, which is just so interesting.
Am I allowed to stop? Can you edit this out if I correct you and say it's Potterversity?
Oh, I'm
Instead
sorry,
of Potterversity.
Yeah. I've been reading it wrong.
Yes.
Hold on a second. So did I get the book title? Oh, okay. Wait, what did I say?
Potterversity is the book title, yes.
Potterversity and Potterversity?
Yes, same thing. Yeah.
Way to do the homework there, Doc. Nice job.
Wait, what did I say?
Potterversary.
Oh,
like rhymes with anniversary.
Oh, that's a new one. I had it right before we logged on. Oh well, I will take my meds tonight and it'll be fine.
I was in a podcast recently where somebody said the title of our Star Wars book totally wrong the entire time, but he was so gracious and so wonderful. I was just like, I can't correct him. I can't. So I made a point of saying it right the last.
Well, thank you for.
I didn't want to correct
him.
I was like, I should really self-advocate.
Yes, you should. I mean, you should be.
No, absolutely.
So so Potterversity.
No,
I'm looking at the title. I got it right.
No, you just said Potterversary.
I said Potterversity. Oh my God.
No, you didn't.
I'm having a full-on senior.
Hold on.
You did just then, though.
Just point your finger and I'll say it. Potterversity.
Okay, so Potterversity.
There we go.
The edited anthology. Wow.
Yes.
Potterversity. Okay, good. So,
good.
Essays exploring the world of Harry Potter. Just kidding. So, with the edited anthology from McFarland, Potterversity. So that we had talked a bit about this with you last time, but that is, we're recording because it's January, and this will drop right around then. This came out late last year in 2023. If you want, let's shill it. I mean, let's talk about it because it's so cool. You had this anthology around Star Wars. You had another one with Star Trek, but this is about the broader Potterverse. I'm curious what drove the two of you to want to do that and edit an anthology around this when you already have this really well received podcast, and like, were you looking for something specific? Were you hoping for a certain type of essay when you started this project?
Great question. And yes, selfishly, yes, I'll get to that. So we were actually approached by a publisher to put together a proposal based on the podcast. So it actually didn't end up being the publisher who published the book, which is McFarland, and we love McFarland, and McFarland's been a great partner in this. But it was a different publisher, and so that didn't work out. But this has, and so we didn't really think of it, but we sure, as soon as the person suggested it, we were like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea, So what we did is we just decided to, I guess we thought we were maybe making it easier on ourselves, but also. We have had so many wonderful guests on the show that we knew right away that several of them had ideas for chapters or essays or presentations, or we had seen them give presentations live often at Chestnut Hill College, Harry Potter Academic Conference every year. that we knew if we just tapped these people and said, will you write this up? And we'll put, let's do a book. And then the question of how do you make a book based on a podcast, how do you make that book distinctive? Katie and I talked it through and we had a couple of different ideas, but what we ended up doing is just gathering our essayists in little small groups of 2 and 3 and putting them together and putting the ideas, sending them each other's chapters in advance and putting the ideas kind of in conversation with each other and then recording that. And we actually have those episodes are just about to start releasing now.
Oh, that's cool.
We have transcripts, partial transcripts of just kind of the meaty parts of them, following those 2 chapters in the book. So it ends up being I think it ends up working really well because the conversations after each set of essays really kind of draw out some of the major themes.
Oh, that's really neat.
Can I backtrack here? Because I'm both of your writers, I am not. For me personally, the idea of, and I read a lot of these during my master's programs, anthologies, related to individuals, themes, theories, whatever. So I find that, and Jason and I have talked about this, that they really show a way to be diverse, but still on the same theme. In general, maybe you alluded to this before, but for those listening that aren't writers, what drew you to the idea, even going back to the other ones, of doing anthology type of publishing?
Good question.
Probably, again, publishers are out there looking for, we've talked about this, publishers are out there looking for books, really parsing popular culture franchises and helping to get the kind of educated, but maybe non-academic reader engaged in academic writing. And so, if I'm being totally honest, prompts from publishers helped me think about doing it this way. Oh yes, I guess I could. But like you, I mean, I've read a lot and I've enjoyed a lot. I'm reading one right now, and it's hit or miss, and like one essay's, really good, and then 3 essays will be like, So I guess what really drove me is the desire to have a volume that was just full of super strong insights articulated strongly and accessibly, in one place. And so that's always my motivating factor. Both Amy Sturgis and I, who we together edited those 2 Star Trek and Star Wars books, and then Katie McDaniel. And it's funny because Katie and Amy are actually really good friends personally. They went to graduate school together, and so they're like besties. And I'm just like crashing their whole relationship. I'm just
seriously
kind of constantly bothering them.
You become the ringleader.
I have. No, I don't know about that.
Strings.
No, I'm like the youngest child who's following them around going, can I do what you guys do? You guys are so cool.
They're both in the background like, she'll do it.
Yeah, just make her eat this. Yeah. But we all 3 kind of had the mindset of the theme is less important to us. In terms of submissions and looking at people's submissions, the theme, any kind of theme we might have in our heads is less important to us than the strength of the idea that sits at the core of the proposal. And that had to make us go, ooh, wow, and sometimes it took, like you see the kernel of that in there, maybe even with a little bit more clarity than the writer at first, and they're kind of like, maybe that would be interesting. And you're like, yeah, go in this direction, please. It so needs to be done, and then to have people who are willing to take that kind of collaboration and to act on it and to act. So, I mean, all of these writers just knocked it all out of the park. I mean, I'm so pleased with how all of these books turned out. And again, that desire, the uniting theme is like, we all love Harry Potter, we all want to talk about Harry Potter, and the discussability of these books, and the same thing with Star Wars and the same thing with Star Trek, but really having all those different voices sitting in dialogue with each other, coming from diverse perspectives and diverse disciplines is just so thrilling to me, as a reader, that I wanted to read more books like that. So
I think, I mean, you look at it as from a companion perspective. If you're a fan of those books, there are, I mean, there's like, the science of books for some of the sci-fi things, and getting people's different perspectives. Just in us talking now, I'm going to be looking at the movies and thinking from those themes. Just along with that, I think we kind of touched on it before, just because you have your academic background. For Potterversity,
there
Jason,
it is.
What are the traditional and kind of topics that you might touch on during the podcast for those that haven't heard it yet?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So again, basically stuff we think is interesting. So, I mean, sometimes we'll say, oh gosh, we haven't had anybody talking about vampires, so let's talk about vampires, or so sometimes we'll think about a topic, and a lot of times for those we call on people who've friends of the show who we know or would have a good perspective on that. But then other times, Katie and I went to LeakyCon, which is a big Harry Potter fan convention. It was in Chicago this past summer, and we did a live podcast at LeakyCon, which was fun. But we heard a fantastic presentation in one of the other sections from an astrophysicist about the astronomy in Harry Potter and how well founded it is in many places, and the various names that come from astronomy. And she really got into some fairly deep weeds, about astrophysics, and yet brought it to life with the books and with what happens in the books, to show how obviously deeply read and, it's somewhat scientifically engaged the author is, and we were just like, oh my gosh, we were sitting there writing her questions on, for the podcast, like while we listened to her presentation. Yeah. So we just kind of glommed onto her afterwards, and we just released her last name is Bright. It's like what a great name for an astrophysicist, Bright. So she was just on the podcast, and it was a great episode. So things like that will happen, or a lot of times we get a lot of ideas. I've mentioned the Harry Potter Academic Conference at Chestnut Hill College. That is an annual thing. They're moving to a 1 year in-person, 1 year hybrid, or 1 year online model. So that's been a great source. I mean, a lot of times we can get topics just either from seeing presentations or having conversations with people. Wow. We can get, topics for almost an entire, podcasting year. So, so really we're very eclectic. We're very just kind of like, we tell our listeners, hey, Potterversity podcast at gmail.com. If you have a fabulous idea, awesome, talk to us about it. So a lot of feminist angles, a lot of different, angles of marginalized groups of people it's great. We love it. Bring it on. We'll do it.
Okay. So let's
hold on, Jason, before.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
I just have one question left, because if I don't ask it, then Jason will
get lost,
and my wand isn't working.
Not working. Sorry. Zoom protection.
So obviously we're going to have you back at some point, because we got to talk music. We talked about this a little bit before we record. So I'll tease that and say we have a lot of music discussion. Just conjecture on your part. So we've finished the movies. There is the play out there, obviously.
Yes.
There are 3 Fantastic Beasts movie. From what I'm seeing, they aren't going to do the other 2.
Sounds like not.
Conjecture on your part, where do you think the franchise goes from here?
Well, I don't know if you've heard about the television adaptation of
that's what I was trying to explain in the car, Brad. I knew something was coming.
Okay. Yes. So there is and forgive me, I don't always know. I think it has something to do with HBO, the platform. Is there a new platform that's coming from?
Yeah, they call it
right.
Max, but it's the same thing.
They're buying everything right now.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think it's meant to be one of their, flagship productions in the way that Mando was a flagship production for Disney Plus. So I think that's what's coming down the pike. Now, do I know anything about production and whether they've started it, or I don't know, I don't follow these things too closely, but right now there's a big debate among the fandom, and maybe it's less, actually it's probably just among the very, the very engaged fandom, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not it's even a good idea. It seems like some people feel like their movies are being taken away from them with this adaptation. And yeah, I can see that. At the same time, I'm kind of a more stuff sort of fan. I'm like, this is never a bad problem to have more stuff to take a look at and think about, and I love the idea of a long form project to adapt these stories, because they do seem to call for that. So that is a real big question mark in terms of what's that going to do to the fandom? Is it going to divide the fandom, unite the fandom? Is there any way to unite a fandom these days? I don't know. So it's very interesting to see. And of course, she's got a lot more books in her. And they're pretty amazing. I'm not a huge fan of her. I've read all the mystery novels.
With the Robert Galbraith, is that
Robert
right?
Galbraith, yes, her pen name there, and she writes these books. Cormoran Strike and Robin Ellicott are the detectives. And I've been kind of like, yeah, I keep up with them. They're really entertaining. Yeah, I get them from the library. Man, this last one, I could not put that thing down. I mean,
interesting.
I was shocked at how absorbed I was in this book. I mean, I really don't think I've been that absorbed in a book since probably Deathly Hallows. So, so she's got more of that magic up her sleeve. And so it'll be interesting to see where it goes. That's my non-answer.
No,
that's a good answer.
It's interesting to hear from those that are ingrained in that universe where they think, and that's actually a great point. Is the long form series going to be oriented more for like adults? And I don't mean that in like a rated R way. I just mean, is it going to
versus like YA?
Yeah,
right.
And maybe the movies become the YA type of entrance into that. But also, let's be honest, the kids now, if you put a 20-year-old movie on, it doesn't, they aren't there with their phone. No one in the phone is doing this in the movie. So
I don't know.
I know.
My daughters are young adults. I mean, 16 and 18, and they watch a lot of 90s movies and a lot of aughts movies, like some of those, and not the ones you'd expect, right? Some of those have staying power.
Right.
Yeah, they do. I don't disagree with that. I just think it might, maybe this is a way to bring another generation in that might just not have gotten, my nieces waited in line for 6 and 7, but for the books, I remember that. They haven't experienced, I mean, what kid now has experienced waiting in line in a bookstore?
Right. I know.
Book,
and these are the people who seem, not all of them, there's many who are just like, yeah, give me more stuff. But there are many who feel very nervous about the new TV show disrupting any of those kinds of memories, and that kind of commitment to the franchise.
And I mean, in all fairness, like that, it's like I can see it because so many of the other franchises, the big ones in sci-fi and fiction, fantasy.
Don't mess with canon.
Yeah, exactly. They've like you look. I mean, you've got the Rings of Power. You have Foundation. You've got, and they're not even pretending that they're following the story anymore, but at least they're using the names. Right?
I heard that.
Actually,
I didn't partake because I was like,
it's beautifully done, and it's like visual. It's actually really, really well worth it. You just you have to. I found, as someone who like grew up on Asimov, okay, you have to just accept with the first episode, this is something new. It's inspired by, it's clearly not meant to be it. And if you can make that transition, like it was easier for season 2, like they were so far off the rails, it's like, oh yeah, this is a really cool story in its own right. But you've got those, I mean, you look, like you said, the Mandalorian, right? A friend of ours just posted on Facebook today. For those of you listening, if you don't know, that's Twitter for old people. So they posted that one of the upcoming Star Wars movies, right? One of those 3 is The Mandalorian and Grogu, which does sound like it comes from the Muppets, but like you look at what all of the many of the big franchises are doing this. And so although I don't agree, I share the concern. I understand the logic. I understand the apprehension that, yeah, you are, like you said, Brad, going to mess with canon.
Don't mess with canon.
Right. Okay. So to pivot for a moment, I'm not going to ask the question I had before, but because we're coming up to that point. So before we take a pinch of the flu powder, a question for you then, Emily, because you've been deeply immersed in all of this Potterversity stuff. If you were at Hogwarts studying, what do you think would be your favorite class?
Transfiguration.
That didn't even barely even got it out.
What house?
Gryffindor.
Okay.
That's even faster.
Okay, Gryffindor.
That's even faster.
Okay. Why Transfiguration?
Yeah, to me, I don't know. There's something even more magically divine about it. I mean, you're changing stuff into stuff. You're changing yourself into something else. And what's so at the core of the whole series is that alchemy, that alchemy of Harry, who we're all invited to inhabit, like we're invited to inhabit Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, but we're all invited to inhabit Harry. And Harry's story is one of the most profound kind of transfiguration, which is of the complete loss of your own kind of self-regard, your self-consciousness, so that you are kind of this empty vessel with which to love and save others. And so there's this constant changing going on. There's this constant alchemy going on, this constant magical transformation going on, that to me just makes Transfiguration sound like. It doesn't surprise me to hear that Dumbledore was a Transfiguration professor. I'm like, of course he was. He's God.
Now, before I try to wave my imaginary wand and turn Jason, like Ron Weasley did, into a cup with a tail hanging out in the end of it, that was second movie.
As long as he's not going to eat slugs.
Oh, yeah.
I was just thinking about
Jason would do that to me back.
If you excuse me, I'm going to go vomit some slugs, but I'll be right back.
Yeah. I'm waving my wand again.
So squelchy.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. We could go on about this for hours. And next time we'll talk about, music. I think the topic of conversation could be Quidditch and the dangers I can't even say it now. I'm just our Quidditch discussion before we started scared me.
I know we didn't even get that. We could just do an episode on the musical motifs in canon, in world, between Harry Potter, Star Wars, and Star Trek.
Oh my gosh! Well,
the roles they played. I mean, that would be like a 14-hour episode, but still,
that would. We might need a musicologist with us because that's some brainiac stuff. Yeah, that is.
I would.
I actually know one.
Oh yeah. Oh
really?
Bring them on. Yeah, there's some really cool podcasts, kind of picking apart a lot of John Williams's music. And showing how different things fit together. Yeah, it's all so cool. So I benefit from those. But yes, and Quidditch. The thing about Quidditch is you don't have to be too scared of Quidditch because it's meant to be symbolic. Okay, so I'll just leave you with that. That's your little tease for the next.
I don't know. Running around with a broom while Jason's trying to hit me with a bat doesn't sound like my idea of
just
a lot of fun.
Another day back in Milwaukee.
Yeah, I guess. I get a call from Jay. I'm coming back into town. I'm leaving.
Yeah. If he hits you directly with the bat, he's breaking the rules.
That's foul, right? It's. I'm going to send the bludger after you.
And I'll be quite honest with you, the odds of Jason actually hitting a ball with the bat are pretty small. So
yeah, I don't do sports. I've heard about them.
Yeah,
it's not a thing.
I feel pretty safe.
Yeah,
Emily, thank you so much for taking the time with us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We could go on, but we want to be cognizant of time. We already know what our next episodes are going to be with you when you come back.
I love it. I love it.
Planned them. So again, thanks so much for us.
And best wishes with all of the books, especially this most recent one. That's so cool.
Thank you so much.
So just so we're clear, Potterversity, right?
Potterversity.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear. Normally you don't.
Normally I talk really good.
Yeah. So that was funny. And Emily was gracious about it.
She was so kind.
So it was one of the funny moments. phenomenal conversation. And obviously we record our intro outro a couple days after. The discussion about faith and the parallels, to me, I found interesting, even not being in that arena.
Yeah.
I think in many ways you can look at multiple, I don't want to sound like I'm versed in multiple different religions, but you with very little research, you could see how they have that hero's journey. And I think you mentioning that in our intro was, I don't think there was a better piece to our intro than that. And I think, Emily, always so gracious, always a fun time. I mean, this is our second time with her.
Yeah.
Always a phenomenal discussion.
Yeah, she always has a lot to say.
Yeah. And very, very kind for her to join us again.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Emily. Now, since we are in the GM corner, and I know the answer to this, what's been on your desk as of late?
Well, I'm going to tease. I'm going to tease that. Well, first of all, I think I've told you that I've been looking at Mark Miller's Traveler 5 opus. That was the term we were talking about.
That's what
Magnum
you were
opus.
for.
Magnum opus.
Magnum opus. Yeah.
Yes.
That's way more impressive than something that's penultimate, but I digress.
Yeah.
Curse your
looking through
obfuscation.
that just because I find that it's such a fascinating read. It's not something we'll play anytime soon. Our direction will be Mongoose just because of the ease in which we can get into it.
Yeah.
But Dr. Lynn Hardy came out. This was something that I picked up over the post-Thanksgiving shopping rush.
Mm-hmm.
Cogs, Cakes, and Sword Sticks. And it's and she talks about this is can be used in the comfort of your favorite tea shop with your friends, requiring nothing more than imagination, a pen, a napkin, and a sugar cube. So she had my interest there. But thanks to our friend Troy at Green Ronin, we've both received the second edition of Fantasy Age RPG.
Troy, everyone at Green Ronin, thank you very much.
Yes, you were, more than kind to do that. So in future episodes, we'll talk about it. We have some plans around bringing someone in, perhaps someone we've talked to before.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, you know who you are.
Yep. Talking about the Fantasy Age and the age mechanic.
Yep.
I said to you beforehand, this game has given me some interest again in playing in the high fantasy world.
Just as an aside, or not an aside perhaps, but as to sidestep before we get into that, it should be noted the Fantasy Age second edition core rulebook is gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
It just is. This is, Green Ronin, they've put out a lot of really obviously really good material, but being, their most recent, you can see the effort that went into this. You can see the evolution that went into this. This is a whole other level of production. It's so good.
And there's a little more meat to the book.
Yeah.
I told you beforehand,
gorgeous.
I'm a big fan of a 1-volume tome.
Yep.
With as much info as possible.
Yep.
And this has
Agreed.
both the player's material and the game master's material in 1 volume. The GM kit is also,
that's pretty cool.
It's a really well done toolkit. So
like a
future
true
episode.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say future episodes we'll talk more about it, but we had to talk about it just because we had to be we had to tell Green Ronin thank you because it was very generous.
We will be, like you said, we will be talking more about this. We literally as we're recording just got our copies, so we need a little time to get into the book, into the game amongst ourselves before we can say anything even remotely worthwhile for Dice in Mind. But that said, I mean, you all know who are listening. If you listen to any of our episodes, you know how closely we look at RPG books of all stripes, especially rule books and source books, in terms of writing, but as well art, production value, printing. There are very, very, very few books that have gotten A pluses per our metrics. And that's including most of the games we love. Most of them don't do that. Some do and do it wonderfully well. This is one of them. This is just lovely work. So more to come. Thanks, Troy. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. What about the only other thing that I want to talk about at some point, and I've been digging in the game on a top, kind of at a higher level, is one of Modiphius's early IP successes, and it's the John Carter of Mars RPG.
Yeah, you've been digging around with that.
Yeah, and this is one where the books were written in the 1880s and through the 1940s, so they were looking at space and sci-fi and fantasy at a time where it was just being born.
Yeah,
and even pre-born.
Liberating the canals of Mars and all that good stuff.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about Hero's Journey, this is a prime example of it. So I'll leave it there. Down the road, I'll have more info on it. What about you? From a reading or gaming perspective?
Well, as you know, more high fantasy. You and I have been talking about this offline for quite some time. And I'm almost there. So I think we mentioned this maybe in a previous episode. I'm pretty sure we did, but back maybe the very end of November, when maybe the first weeks of December when the sales were crazy. I think it was still November. You and I were each able. Well, I did. And then days later you sent me your order confirmation.
I know where you're going now.
I picked up a copy of that new printing, that special printing of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The one, and it's stunning. And it turns out they also now have released The Hobbit and a Silmarillion in similar ones. But I picked it up because I got it on Amazon. Let's call it what it is, for an exceptional sale. And an exceptional sale, like around a third of the price. And I had admired that since I first saw it in a local bookstore, which is now closed, maybe 2 years ago, I think, a year and a half ago when it came out. We were still in the pandemic. We were just starting to go into places with masks. I saw a physical copy. It was gorgeous. And I thought, I just can't justify it. I have it. I've read it.
Yeah.
This, though, was so gorgeous that when I saw that price, boom, that was it. I ordered it. It's been sitting on my shelf for a couple months. And, reading The Lord of the Rings, again, it's a bit of a commitment.
Oh, yeah.
But all of this talk from you for the past 2 months about Fantasy H2E, that coupled with the awareness of this volume, this printing, that's what's been on my shelf. So I'm planning on, as early as the end of this coming weekend, I'm going to start the Fellowship of the Ring. And you know what? I'm looking forward to it.
It's a beautiful book. And once I get through some of the backlog of material that I had out and decided to focus elsewhere for the holidays, now I'm back in it. And I would say probably within the month, I'm going to start it as well.
Yeah, good. And of course, at some point, we're all going to be talking about the One Ring again, because we keep bringing that up. It's like the Eye of Sauron. It's inexorably, slowly, subtly bringing us toward that inevitable conclusion that we will have to get and play that game.
And for those that you don't know, Jason has a striking resemblance to Gollum.
I have no comment. My precious. Well, on that note, as always, thanks for being with us. we wish you still a happy, healthy, meaningful, productive new year, because it's still January for a little bit longer. Be well, stay well. We'll see you next week.